What happens when a simple mail-order bride arrangement turns into the most dangerous deception in the Wild West? You're about to discover a tale of twin sisters, stolen identities, and a love that defies all conventions. Jake Morrison had memorized every word of the letter. 3 months of correspondence, every detail planned, every emotion carefully written in neat handwriting that promised a life he'd only dreamed of. He stood at the edge of his property, watching the dust cloud grow larger on the horizon, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged animal. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of his modest ranch house in Silver Creek Valley, and the driver tipped his hat without saying a word. But when the canvas flap pulled back, Jake's breath caught in his throat. 2 women stepped down, identical in every way that mattered. The same chestnut hair catching sunlight like copper wire, the same blue eyes, the same delicate features that matched the description in every letter he'd received. One moved with quiet grace, her dress pristine despite the long journey, hands folded neatly as she looked around with wide, almost frightened eyes. The other stepped down with purpose, her identical dress somehow appearing more wrinkled, her chin raised in a way that suggested she feared nothing and no one. They both carried the same worn leather satchel. They both wore the same silver locket around their necks, and when they looked at him, they both smiled with the same mouth he'd imagined kissing on countless lonely nights. "Mr. Morrison?" The gentler one spoke first, her voice soft as morning rain. "I'm Emma Hayes, your bride." "No," the other interrupted, stepping forward with eyes that held storm clouds. "I'm Elena Hayes, and I believe there's been some kind of mistake." But this was just the beginning of a web of deception that would threaten, not only Jake's ranch, but the lives of everyone involved. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the letters in his shirt pocket. 3 months of careful courtship that had led to this moment, but as he looked between the 2 identical women, both claiming the same name, both carrying identical belongings, he realized that everything he thought he knew about his carefully planned future had just shattered like glass. The driver cracked his whip and rolled away without looking back, leaving Jake alone with 2 identical strangers who somehow both knew details about his life that only his true bride should know. Details that were impossible for both of them to possess. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, ready to snap. Jake's eyes darted from one woman to the other, searching for some difference, some tell that would solve this impossible puzzle, but every freckle, every curve of their faces, every strand of chestnut hair seemed perfectly matched. "Ladies," Jake managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "There's clearly been some confusion. Perhaps if we could sit down and sort this out properly." The gentler one, the first to speak, nodded quickly, relief flooding her features. "Of course, Mr. Morrison. I understand this must be overwhelming. In my letters, I mentioned how I helped my aunt with her bakery in Boston before the fire took everything." Jake's blood ran cold. Those exact words had been in the 3rd letter he'd received, written in careful script about family and loss and the hope for a fresh start. "The fire," the other woman said, stepping closer with eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. "The one that started when Mrs. Campbell's chimney caught. I lost everything that day, which is why I answered your advertisement." Her voice carried the same story, but with an edge of steel that made Jake's skin prickle. He pulled the letters from his pocket, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded the first one. "Which of you wrote about the horse named Thunder?" "I did," they both said simultaneously. "And the recipe for cornbread that your grandmother taught you?" "That was me," came the chorus again, neither woman backing down. Jake studied their faces, looking for any crack in their certainty. The gentler one bit her lower lip, a gesture that seemed nervous and genuine. The stronger one held his gaze without flinching, her jaw set in a way that dared him to question her. "This is impossible," he muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. "How can you both know these things? How can you both have the same name, the same story, the same face?" the stronger one interrupted. "Because we're sisters, Mr. Morrison, twin sisters, and it seems someone has played a very cruel joke on all of us." The words "sisters" hit Jake like a physical blow. Twin sisters, both claiming to be his bride, both knowing intimate details from months of correspondence. His mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. But the name, he pressed. You can't both be Emma Hayes. The gentler one looked down at her hands. My name is Emma Hayes, she said softly. And mine, the other said firmly, is Isabella Crawford. But the letters I wrote were signed Emma Hayes. Jake felt the ground shift beneath his feet. You mean you've been pretending to be someone else? Isabella's eyes flashed with something dangerous. I mean someone has been using both our names, both our stories, for reasons we don't yet understand. The question is, Mr. Morrison, who do you think is really supposed to be here? Little did they know, their arrival had been watched by dangerous eyes, and the trap was about to be sprung. Before Jake could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley, and his blood turned to ice when he recognized the rider leading them. Victor Kane dismounted his black stallion with the smooth confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. Two other riders flanked him, their hands resting casually on their gun belts in a way that suggested they weren't just ranch hands. Victor's pale eyes swept over the scene before him, Jake standing between two identical women like a man caught in a trap. Well, well, Victor drawled, removing his hat to reveal silver-streaked hair that caught the afternoon sun. Appears congratulations are in order, Morrison. Though I have to say, I wasn't expecting such abundance in your matrimonial arrangements. Jake's jaw tightened. This is a private matter, Kane. You're not welcome here. Now that's where you're wrong. Victor's smile never reached his eyes as he approached the small group. You see, I have a vested interest in your little domestic situation, especially considering the debt you owe me. What debt? Emma asked quietly, stepping slightly behind Jake. Isabella, however, moved forward, her blue eyes studying Victor with the intensity of a hawk watching prey. You're the man who's been trying to buy this land. Victor's eyebrows rose with mock surprise. Smart girl. Yes, I've made Mr. Morrison several generous offers for this property, offers he's foolishly refused. He turned back to Jake with an expression that had lost all pretense of friendliness. But now that you've got yourself hitched, or double hitched as it appears, well, that changes the legal situation considerably. How so? Jake demanded. Marriage contracts, my friend. Debts transferred to spouses, community property laws. Victor circled them slowly like a vulture. Of course, there's also the small matter of fraud, bigamy, immigration irregularities. His gaze fixed on the twins. Unless, of course, these ladies can prove their legitimate right to be here. Jake felt anger surge through his chest. You son of a... Easy there, one of Victor's men said, his hand moving to his weapon. But it was Isabella who surprised them all by laughing, a sound sharp as breaking glass. You orchestrated this, she said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. The letters, the confusion, all of it. You needed Jake in a legally compromised position. Victor's smile widened. That's quite an accusation from a woman who admits to traveling here under false pretenses. We didn't admit to anything, Emma said, her soft voice suddenly steady. We said someone used our names. Someone who knew details about our lives that only family would know. Family, Isabella repeated, her eyes never leaving Victor's face. Or someone who's been watching us for a very long time. The pieces began falling into place in Jake's mind like dominoes toppling in sequence. The convenient timing of the letters, the identical knowledge both women possessed, the way Victor had appeared just moments after their arrival. You bastard, Jake breathed. You had them followed. You copied their letters, their stories. Prove it, Victor challenged. But before anyone could respond, Emma gasped and pointed toward the house. There's someone inside. All eyes turned toward Jake's house, where a shadow moved past the window with deliberate purpose. Jake's hand instinctively reached for the rifle that wasn't there. He'd left it inside, never expecting to need protection on what should have been the happiest day of his life. Stay behind me, he ordered the women, but Isabella was already moving toward the house with the determined stride of someone who feared nothing. Isabella, don't, Emma whispered, but her sister Watt was beyond hearing. Victor's laugh cut through the tension like a blade. How exciting. It seems your homecoming has even more surprises than anticipated. Jake ignored him, his focus entirely on the figure that had now appeared in his doorway. A woman stepped onto the porch, tall, elegant, with graying hair pulled back severely, and clothes that spoke of money and authority. She surveyed the scene before her with the cold assessment of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Mrs. Sterling," Victor called out with genuine pleasure. "Perfect timing, as always." The older woman's gaze settled on the twins, and something flickered across her features. Recognition, perhaps, or satisfaction. "Mr. Kane, I see our arrangement has proceeded exactly as planned." Emma made a small, strangled sound. "Aunt Victoria." The woman's attention snapped to her. "Hello, Emma." "Isabella." Her voice carried no warmth, only the tired resignation of someone completing an unpleasant but necessary task. "What are you doing here?" Isabella demanded, but even her fierce confidence seemed shaken by this unexpected reunion. "Cleaning up your father's mess, as I've been doing for the past 20 years, Victoria Sterling stepped down from the porch, her movements precise and controlled. "He owed Mr. Kane a considerable sum before his death, money that doesn't simply disappear because the debtor is no longer with us." The web of deception was about to be fully revealed, but would Jake and the twins survive what was coming next? Jake felt the world tilting around him. "What does this have to do with me, with my bride?" "Your bride," Victoria said with bitter amusement, "was never real, Mr. Morrison. The letters, the correspondence, the careful courtship, all fabricated to bring you into a legally binding contract with not one, but two women of questionable status." "That's impossible," Jake protested. "I received letters for months, personal details, stories." "Stories I provided," Victoria interrupted. "Every word carefully crafted from years of watching my nieces, cataloging their lives, their dreams, their secrets. Information that became quite valuable when Mr. Kane required leverage against a stubborn rancher who refused to sell his land." Emma's face had gone pale as moonlight. "You used us. You sold our stories, our lives." "I saved your lives," Victoria snapped. "Your father's gambling debts would have seen you both in far worse circumstances than this. At least here, one of you might find a decent husband." Isabella stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "You mean you delivered us like cattle to be sold?" But it was Victor who answered, his voice smooth as silk over steel. "Not sold, my dear, traded. Your aunt's debts for your compliance. Mr. Morrison's land for his legal troubles. Everyone gets what they need." "Except," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, "I don't recall agreeing to any of this." Victor's smile widened. "Which brings us to the beauty of the situation. You're now married, or about to be, to women who traveled here under false pretenses. That makes you an accessory to fraud, unless, of course, you'd prefer to sell your land and walk away clean." The trap was perfect, elegant in its cruelty. But as Jake looked at Emma's frightened face and Isabella's blazing anger, he realized something that Victor hadn't counted on. He was falling, in love with both of them. The realization hit Jake like a physical blow as he watched Emma's quiet strength emerge beneath her gentle exterior and Isabella's fierce protection of her sister despite their impossible circumstances. These weren't pawns in someone else's game. They were women who had been betrayed as thoroughly as he had. "There's something you didn't count on, Kane," Jake said, his voice carrying a calm that surprised even him. "Oh, and what's that?" "I'm not walking away." Victor's confidence flickered for the first time. "Don't be a fool, Morrison. You have no legal standing. These women can't prove they're here legitimately. Then I'll marry both of them." The words hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Victoria Sterling's composed facade cracked. Victor's men shifted nervously. Even Emma and Isabella stared at him in shock. "That's not legal," Victor sputtered. "But announcing my intention to do so creates enough legal confusion to tie up your fraud charges for months, maybe years." Jake stepped closer to the twins, his decision crystallizing with each word. "And in the meantime, I keep my land. These ladies get protection from whatever debts you claim they owe." And you get to explain to a federal judge why you've been trafficking women across state lines for debt collection. Victoria's face went white. You don't understand the forces you're challenging. Try me. But it was Isabella who spoke next, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. There's something else you all don't know. She reached into her satchel and withdrew a leather portfolio tied with ribbon. Our father didn't just leave debts when he died. She untied the ribbon with deliberate slowness, letting the papers unfold. He left us mineral rights to a gold claim in Nevada that's been producing steadily for 2 years. But their victory would be short-lived. Victor Kane wasn't the type of man to accept defeat gracefully. The silence that followed was deafening. That's impossible, Victoria breathed. He lost everything gambling. He lost everything you knew about, Emma said quietly, stepping beside her sister. But he never told you about the claim he filed under our mother's maiden name. We only discovered it after his death when the lawyers contacted us. Victor's face had gone from confident to calculating to something approaching panic. How much? Enough, Isabella said with grim satisfaction, to pay whatever debts you claim we owe, buy this ranch twice over, and still have enough left to make life very uncomfortable for anyone who's been manipulating us. Victoria stepped backward, her composure finally cracking completely. You're lying. You have no money, or you wouldn't have answered a mail-order bride advertisement. We didn't answer any advertisement, Emma said, her soft voice carrying steel. We came here because someone was writing letters in my name to a stranger, and we wanted to know why. Jake felt pieces clicking into place. You came here to investigate. We came here, Isabella said, to find out who was stealing our identities and why. We never expected to find ourselves in the middle of a land grab. Victor's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped when he realized all eyes were on him. This changes no thing. You still can't prove fraud. Actually, a new voice called from behind them. I think they can. Everyone turned to see a man in a dusty coat approaching on horseback, a silver badge glinting on his chest. Behind him rode 2 more men, their rifles visible in their saddle holsters. Sheriff Reynolds, Victor said, his voice carefully controlled. What brings you out this way? The sheriff dismounted slowly, his eyes taking in the scene. Received some interesting telegrams about missing women and forged correspondence. Seems there's been quite a bit of mail fraud happening in these parts. He looked directly at Victoria Sterling. Mrs. Sterling, I believe you have some explaining to do. The confrontation was about to turn deadly, and not everyone would survive what happened next. Victoria Sterling's carefully constructed composure shattered like ice on a warm morning. Sheriff, I can explain. I'm sure you can, ma'am. But first, I'd like to hear from these young ladies. Sheriff Reynolds's weathered face was kind but firm as he approached Emma and Isabella. Miss Hayes, Miss Crawford, I presume. You know our real names, Isabella said, surprise flickering across her features. Received a telegram from a lawyer in Boston 3 days ago. Seems someone's been impersonating you ladies in correspondence across 3 states. We've been tracking this operation for weeks. Victor's face had gone ashen, but his voice remained steady. Sheriff, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Reynolds interrupted, is how long you thought you could run this scheme before getting caught. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Got a warrant here for mail fraud, conspiracy, and trafficking. That's just the beginning. Jake stepped forward, his mind racing. How many others? How many men like me? 7 that we know of, all ranchers or property owners who refuse to sell, all suddenly faced with legal complications involving fraudulent marriages or questionable business partners. The sheriff's eyes hardened. Clever system. Create problems that could only be solved by selling land at well below market value. Emma moved closer to Jake, her shoulder brushing his arm. The simple contact sent heat through his chest, and he noticed how she seemed to seek his protection instinctively. What happens to us now? Well, miss, that depends on what you want to happen. Isabella stepped forward, her blue eyes fierce. We want justice, and we want to make sure no one else gets hurt by these people. Victoria laughed bitterly. Justice? You two have no idea what justice costs. Your father's debts are real, girls. The money he owed doesn't disappear because you've inherited some mining claim. Actually, Reynolds said mildly, it does, especially when those debts were acquired through illegal gambling operations that Mr. Kane here was running out of the back room of his saloon. The revelation hit like lightning. Victor's illegal gambling had created the debts that gave him leverage over the families. The mail fraud scheme was just the mechanism to collect on land he couldn't legally seize. You son of a bitch, Jake breathed, understanding flooding through him. You created the debts, then offered the only solution. But Victor was already moving, his hand snapping to his gun with practiced speed. Nobody's taking anything from me. The metallic sound of his weapon clearing leather froze everyone except Sheriff Reynolds, whose own gun appeared in his hand with the fluid motion of long experience. Drop it, Kane. For a heartbeat, time balanced on a knife's edge. Then Victor's eyes shifted to Emma, standing closest to him, and his gun swung toward her with deadly intent. If I can't have the land, nobody can. Jake threw himself forward without thinking, his body moving between the gun and Emma. But it was Isabella who reached them first, tackling her sister to the ground just as the thunder of gunfire split the afternoon air. The final showdown had begun, but would love triumph over greed and violence? Through the smoke and chaos, Jake saw Victor stumble backward, clutching his shoulder as Sheriff Reynolds' deputies moved in. But his relief was short-lived when he heard Isabella's sharp cry of pain. Blood was spreading across her dress where Victor's wild shot had found its mark. Blood soaked through Isabella's dress like spilled wine on white cloth, and Jake's world narrowed to the spreading red stain across her left shoulder. She was conscious but pale, her fierce blue eyes now clouded with pain and shock. "Get her inside," Jake commanded, scooping Isabella into his arms with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. Her head fell against his chest, and he could feel her trembling despite her attempts to appear strong. Emma ran ahead, throwing open the door to the ranch house and clearing the kitchen table with swift efficiency. "Put her here," she directed, her soft voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. As Jake lowered Isabella onto the table, their eyes met for a moment that felt suspended in time. Even wounded, even vulnerable, she looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Don't you dare look at me like I'm dying," she whispered, but her usual fire was dampened by pain. "Wouldn't dream of it," Jake replied, but his hands shook as he helped Emma examine the wound. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of Isabella's shoulder, missing bone and major arteries by what looked like mere inches. Emma worked with practiced efficiency, tearing cloth for bandages and applying pressure to stop the bleeding. "You know medicine?" Jake asked. "Our mother was a midwife," Emma explained without looking up from her work. "She taught us both, but Isabella was always too impatient to learn properly." "I was not," Isabella protested weakly, then winced as Emma probed the wound. "I just had better things to do than memorize which herbs stopped bleeding." "Like getting into fights with boys twice your size," Emma said, but her voice carried deep affection beneath the worry. Outside, they could hear Sheriff Reynolds giving orders to his deputies and the sound of chains as Victor and Victoria were shackled for transport. The immediate danger was over, but Jake realized that the most complicated part of this situation was just beginning. He was in love with both sisters. The realization had crystallized in the moment he'd seen Isabella throw herself in front of a bullet meant for Emma. And again, when he'd watched Emma's gentle competence as she cared for her wounded sister, two halves of something he'd never known he was missing. "Jake," Isabella sighed quietly, grabbing his wrist with her uninjured hand. "I need to tell you something about why we really came here." Emma's hands stilled on the bandage she was wrapping. "Isabella, don't." "She needs to know," Isabella insisted, her eyes never leaving Jake's face. "We didn't just come to investigate the letters. We came because—" She took a shaky breath. "Because we were both already in love with you." The confession hung in the air like smoke from a spent match. Jake stared at her, then at Emma, whose face had turned the color of fresh roses. We read every letter you wrote, Emma whispered, even though they were addressed to someone else, even though we knew it was wrong. Your words, your thoughts, the way you described your life and your dreams. We both fell in love with the man who wrote those letters. Jake's mind reeled. But I wrote to Emma Hayes. I thought I was writing to one person. You were writing to both of us, Isabella said with a weak smile. Victoria made sure both our stories ended up in those letters. She just never counted on us falling in love with you in return. But their troubles weren't over yet. Before Jake could respond, Sheriff Reynolds appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Mr. Morrison, we've got a problem. Kane's escaped. Reynolds's words sent ice through Jake's veins. How is that possible? I saw your deputies arrest him. Kane's men created a distraction, cut him loose while we were securing Mrs. Sterling. Reynolds checked his rifle with practiced efficiency. He's wounded, desperate, and knows these hills better than we do. Makes him extremely dangerous. Jake moved to the window, scanning the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him uncomfortably of blood. He'll come back for revenge. That's what I'm counting on, Reynolds said grimly. We've got men positioned around the property. He won't come for a straight fight, Isabella interrupted from the table, her voice weak but certain. Victor spent years manipulating people from the shadows. He'll try something clever. As if summoned by her words, the sharp crack of breaking glass echoed from the back of the house, followed immediately by the acrid smell of smoke. Fire! Emma gasped, rushing to the window. He's trying to burn us out. Jake could see orange flames already licking at the barn through the kitchen window. If the fire spread to the house, they'd be forced outside where Victor could pick them off one by one. We need to get Isabella out of here, Jake decided, moving toward the table. I can walk, she protested, but when she tried to sit up, her face went white with pain. Like hell you can. Jake scooped her up again, this time noting how she didn't argue, just wrapped her good arm around his neck and pressed her face against his shoulder. Sheriff, can your men cover us to the corral? Jake asked. The horses are already spooked by the fire, Reynolds replied, peering out the window. But there's something else. Look. Through the smoke, they could see movement near the burning barn. Not Victor, but his remaining men, closing in from multiple directions with rifles raised. He's got us surrounded, Emma breathed. That's when Jake heard it. The distinctive whistle he'd learned as a boy, the same signal his father had used when calling cattle. It was coming from the direction of the fire, low and mournful. But it wasn't a cattle call. That bastard, Jake muttered, understanding flooding through him. He's not just trying to burn us out, he's using the fire to stampede my horses directly toward the house. The thunder of hoofbeats grew louder, and through the smoke, they could see his entire herd, nearly 30 horses, charging directly toward them in blind panic, driven by the flames behind them and Victor's men on the flanks. He means to trample us, Reynolds realized with horror. Jake looked at Isabella in his arms, then at Emma standing pale but determined beside him. These women had risked everything to find the truth, had been betrayed by their own family, and now faced death because of his stubborn refusal to sell his land. But as he watched the wall of panicked horses bearing down on them, Jake made a decision that surprised even him. Emma, can you handle a rifle? Better than most men, she replied without hesitation. Then cover the windows. Sheriff, your men need to focus on Victor's riders. Jake moved toward the door, still carrying Isabella. I'm going to stop this stampede. That's suicide, Reynolds protested. Jake smiled, and for the first time in hours it reached his eyes. No, Sheriff, that's ranching. The final confrontation would test not only their courage, but the power of love to overcome impossible odds. Jake stepped onto the porch with Isabella still in his arms, facing the wall of panicked horses thundering toward them. Behind him, he could hear the sharp crack of Emma's rifle as she picked off Victor's men with deadly precision. Put me down, Isabella whispered urgently. You can't stop them while carrying me. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Her blue eyes met his with fierce intensity. Trust me. Against every instinct, Jake set her gently against the porch railing. Then he stepped into the yard and did something that would have seemed impossible to anyone who didn't understand horses. He began to sing, the low, rhythmic melody his father had taught him years ago. Not the sharp whistle that spooked animals, but the deep, calming tune that gentled even the wildest mustang. His voice carried over the thunder of hooves, and slowly, impossibly, the lead horses began to slow. But Victor wasn't finished. Through the smoke came his voice, raised in fury. "Kill them all!" The crack of his rifle sent splinters flying from the porch beam, inches from Jake's head. Victor emerged from behind the burning barn, his wounded shoulder making his aim unsteady, but his desperation making him deadly. That's when Emma appeared beside Jake, rifle in hand, her gentle exterior replaced by cold determination. "This ends now." Her shot took Victor in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him into the dirt. He tried to raise his weapon one last time, but Sheriff Reynolds's bullet finished what Emma had started. Victor Kane would manipulate no more families, steal no more land, destroy no more lives. The horses, responding to Jake's continued singing, had slowed to a nervous milling around the yard. The fire was already dying as Reynolds's men doused it with water from the well. The immediate danger was over, but the question that had haunted Jake since the moment two identical women stepped off that wagon remained unanswered. "I need to tell you both something," he said, turning to face Emma and Isabella. "I'm in love with you, both of you, and I don't know how to choose between you." The sisters exchanged a look that spoke of years of shared secrets and unspoken understanding. "Then don't," Isabella said softly. "What?" Emma stepped forward, taking his hand. "We've talked about this, Jake. While you were worried about the law and the land and Victor's schemes, we were talking about what we really wanted. We want to stay," Isabella continued. "Both of us, together. This ranch is big enough for 3 people who care about each other. But I can't marry you both," Jake protested. "It's not legal." "Marry Emma," Isabella interrupted. "She's the one who needs the legal protection. I'm strong enough to make my own way in the world." She smiled, and despite her wound, it was radiant. "But that doesn't mean I'm leaving. This feels like home." Emma blushed, but didn't contradict her sister. "If you'll have us both, in whatever way works. We're tired of being alone, Jake. All 3 of us." Standing there in the fading light, surrounded by the aftermath of violence but looking toward a future none of them had planned, Jake realized that sometimes the best solutions were the ones that broke all the rules. Epilogue.